Hey everyone, I'm Mike and I'm an alcoholic. Are these the extra books if anyone needs one, Tommy?
Yeah.
Okay, if you guys need a book, there's a book up front here. I want to thank you guys for having me here tonight, and I'm not going to lie, I'm a little nervous about sharing, but that's okay. There's a lot of guys in this room and that I really look up to. Gentlemen that have taught me this way of life, and I'm honored to be up here and share my experience. So first, I'd like to start off a little bit in the past, just to explain how I kind of got here, and then I'm not going to spend much time on my using history. One thing I really am grateful for is that this is a Drug Addicts Anonymous program tonight. I've been an Alcoholics Anonymous for a while, and to be home, because. When I drink, I drink alcoholically, but drugs are a huge part of my story. So anytime I'm speaking at an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, I've got to leave that part out, So it's really nice to be able to come in here tonight and talk about my drug addiction, because my drug addiction has been a real big part of my story. So when I was a child, I was really afraid. Really fearful. I was afraid of everything as a kid. I came from a family of alcoholics and drug addicts. My family was really violent. They were partying. The party was always at our house. My parents partied all day long. So as I was growing up, I had these fears, these abandonment fears. I never got what I needed. I had this fear of never belonging. As I grew up and I went through school, I could never make friends. I always felt like I was an outcast. I had this fear that the world would end for a really long time. And because of these fears, I developed these disorders. I had anxiety disorders, and I had panic attacks constantly. They're life-threatening at the time. That's what I thought they were. So as I grow up with these fears, I go in and out of schools. I get introduced, finally, to marijuana. Right around age 12. And what this did for me is, I heard somebody explain it once, for most of my life, I kind of felt like I was holding my breath, always afraid of everything, never wanted to talk to anybody, never fit in anywhere. I was suicidal very early in life, right around 10 or 11. I just wanted it to end. And when I finally got introduced to marijuana by one of my brothers, I remember having this feeling of just peace, like everything was okay. And I think that's, for me, that's what drug and alcohol did for most of my career as a drug addict, is it made everything okay for me. I no longer had to worry about things. I kind of fit in with people. I tell you my past to tell you this, that the violence that I lived through, the sexual assaults, the molestation, the abandonments, the fears, none of that made me a drug addict or an alcoholic. What makes me a drug addict or an alcoholic is that when I use, I can't stop. And when I stop, I cannot stay stopped. I'm completely powerless over the disease. Alcoholics Anonymous, I come in and out of this program for many years, and I think that drugs and alcohol are the problem, I think that if I could just find a way to use successfully, like the next time, if I just change, my substances around a little bit, or I use on a different day, or I find the girl that's using a different drug, or if I only drink on Saturdays and not Sundays, like I try to manipulate this deal for many years, for about 15 years. I come in and out of these rooms, and I'm not like you guys. Like, you guys are speaking a language that I don't even understand, right? So I think that the next time I use, it's going to be different. And I kind of go through that for a very, very long time. And I finally come into Alcoholics Anonymous, and we read step 1. I finally, this deal had beaten me after very many years into the state of reasonableness that I was kind of willing to do just anything, because I didn't want to die, but I did want to die all at the same time. Like, it made no sense to me. So I come into Alcoholics Anonymous, and we start with step 1. And step 1 is we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. And I'm going to start off. There's a quote here in Dr. Bob's Nightmare. And we read this a while ago, and this paragraph really sums up, what I went through for many, many years. It says, this routine went on with few interruptions for about 17 years. It was really a horrible nightmare. I'm on page 177, guys. Sorry, at the second paragraph, about halfway down the second paragraph there. It says, this routine went on few interruptions for 17 years. It was a really horrible nightmare. This earning money, getting liquor, smuggling it home, getting wasted, morning jitters, taking large doses of sedatives to make it possible for me to earn more money, and so on ad nauseum. And that was my experience. I was caught in this trap to where I just didn't want to be sick anymore. You know, in the beginning, drugs and alcohol, they did exactly what they were supposed to do. They made things okay. You know, they made me the cool guy. I could talk to girls. You know, I could go to bed. I could wake up. I could do it all over again. But by the end of the progression of the disease, I was caught in this cycle to where to not get sick, I had to do certain things. I had to earn money. I had to go get it. I had to find it. I had to come home. I had to use, and then I had to start this cycle all over again. So as I come into Alcoholics Anonymous and we go to step 1 where we admitted we were powerless over drugs and alcohol, they asked me what powerlessness was, and I had no idea. I didn't know what powerlessness was. I didn't know what was wrong with me. So in the doctor's opinion, we start talking about, you know, these guys start explaining to me this disease, because I didn't even know this was a disease when I walked in here. And they start explaining to me this allergy and this phenomenon of craving that happens anytime I put a drug or a drink in my system. So I remember the first time they said I had an allergy to drugs and alcohol, and I was like, you're full of crap, you know, I don't have no allergy, I don't break out in hives, you know, and my throat doesn't close up, you know, and they really had to sit me down and say, no, what we mean by an allergy is that anytime you put a drink or drug in your system, you have an abnormal reaction. And what happens is you put another one in, and you put another one in, and you put another one in, and another one, and it just keeps going on and on and on and on. And that was my experience. Anytime I got loaded, I couldn't get any more wasted than I already was. I was already as high as possible or drunk as possible, but I continued to put this stuff in my system over and over and over and over. The next part of the powerlessness is the phenomenon of craving, that when I was not high or drunk, I had this mental obsession that all I did was think about how I was going to get that next one, like we just read in Dr. Bob's Nightmare. How am I going to get the next fix? How am I going to get the money for it? What am I going to do when I get it? I remember in my experience, I would be okay on the way to the dealer's house, right? And before I even got what I needed, everything was okay for me. And I remember that. And there was this crazy cycle that I was in, this mental obsession, that when my mind knew that it was tangible, I was going to get it, I was going to get what I needed, that this would stop and go away. And for me, that's what powerlessness is today. That when I start, I can't stop, and then when I stop, I simply just can't stay stopped. And I didn't understand why this was for a really long time. And what it comes down to is I'm allergic to being sober. That's what it is for me, is I have no idea on how to live life soberly. And then in the doctors in the 1930s, you know, they described it as restless, irritable, and discontent. And it really sums it up, that when I was sober and I'm not working a program of recovery, I'm extremely restless. I'm either living in the future or the past. I'm worried about everything. I'm driven by fear. I'm irritable. You know, people in the grocery line piss me off. People at the traffic light piss me off. My children's mother pissed me off. And I'm discontent. I'm not happy. And that was my experience throughout most of my life, as I was not happy. I would go and I would get loaded and I would be happy, because when I got loaded, it simply just made everything okay for me. Like, and the bill's not paid, that's okay. I'm going to figure out another way to pay the bills. You know, they take my children away, well, that's okay. You know, I'm going to figure that out tomorrow. For me, getting loaded was always pushing it off to another time, right? So I was never, ever living in the moment. So as I start to take this in, there is a line in the big book that I really like, and the line is, basically, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit here, but it says that I need a clear mind to grasp any of this. And for me, that was my experience. Towards the end of my addiction, I wanted to die, but I didn't want to die, and my life was so unmanageable. So I had a career, I had a credit score of 750, I had 3 kids, I had a vehicle, I had a house, I had a high-paying job, you know, people liked me. And what happened is the progression of the disease, because that's what this is a progression of a disease. My morals started getting cut over the years. So what happened is I lost a job, then I couldn't keep a job, then I became unemployable. You know, I ruined every single relationship in my life, because I would constantly go back to this one thing that I thought was going to fix everything. But the one thing I thought was going to fix everything was the one thing that was ruining my life. And this deal is so baffling that I couldn't see it at that time, right? So I become homeless. My kids don't want to see me anymore. Like I said, I couldn't keep a job. And I weighed 185 pounds, and in 3 months I was down to 140. Because my mind was completely warped. This thing I was its slave. It was my master. It's the only thing I thought about when we talk about the phenomenon of craving, and we talk about the allergy, that I lived that I used to live and I lived to use. That was my life. So finally, I have this moment of clarity. I'm homeless. I go to my mom's house, and I'm sitting on the couch, and I just stayed up for like 4 days, and I'm looking in the mirror, and the guy I see in the mirror, I don't even recognize anymore. Now, for many years, I wouldn't even look at the guy in the mirror because I hated that guy in the mirror. The things that guy did, how can anybody love this guy? All those fears that I had as children, they followed me. But the book tells me, for some reason, I had an act of providence, this little moment of clarity, to where I knew that no matter what I did, no matter how much will I sufficed, that I could never beat this thing. And it was a moment of powerlessness when I finally knew that no matter what I did, no matter human aid, no doctor could help me. My wife couldn't keep me sober. My kids couldn't keep me sober. My job couldn't keep me sober. Nothing could stop me from getting loaded. And I had this moment of clarity of powerlessness. And at this moment, I went from 185 pounds to 140 pounds. My face is sunken in. I haven't eaten days. I'm dirty. My morals had been cut from this nice guy, this father, this coworker, all the way down to nothing. And so I finally had this moment of clarity, and at that moment, I asked God to help me. And a couple hours later, I had been coming in and out of these rooms for a very long time, and I knew some guys, so I called, and they got me into a rehab. And as soon as I got there, I wanted to leave, by the way. Rehab sucks, But I had been to lots of rehabs throughout my career. When I was 15, I went to rehab because everybody else could see that I had a problem, but I could never see that I had a problem, right? But I finally get to this rehab, and I didn't come looking for Alcoholics Anonymous. You guys came to me. I didn't even know I needed this deal. I thought that what you guys had wasn't going to work for me, that what you guys believed in would never work for me, until somebody actually sat me down and taught me the powerlessness of this disease, and that it was a disease, and that there's only certain people have this and other people don't. Like, I know people that can have a drink, or maybe 5 drinks, and then they can go to bed. When I have a drink, we're going to go get loaded. Like, I'm trying to get to the thing that's going to get me to the place that I want to be, right? But I know people that can party and go to work and have normal lives, and then if a sufficient reason comes for them to stop, they can stop. And that's not my story. I had so many sufficient reasons. I had health reasons. I had children. I had family. I had jobs. I had so many reasons to put it down, but I couldn't put it down. I could never put it down. And that was powerlessness. The other side of this deal is also the unmanageability. And in the beginning, I could not see the unmanageability of my life. At the end of my career, I could definitely see the unmanageability. Being homeless, being a loving father, to where my children meant the world to me, right? When my son was born, I was going to do anything for that child, anything. And a couple years later, I was out getting loaded, not even thinking about that child, whether he had clothes on his body, whether he was going to eat, whether he was going to shower that night or had a safe place to sleep. That didn't matter to me. And that's powerlessness. That's the definition of powerlessness for me today. That all of the things I loved, I completely pushed to one side to chase the one thing that in the end is killing me, right? I was thinking today about this, coming here and talking to you guys, and there's this one line in the 12 and 12, and I really love our 12 and 12, because the 12 and 12 kind of just expands on the concept of what the big book already says. And in this one line, it says, going back into our own drinking histories, we could show that years before we realized it, we were out of control, that our drinking, even then, was no mere habit, that it was indeed the beginning of a fatal progression. I couldn't see that progression because I was told time and time again by you guys that this is a progressive disease, that you're powerless over this disease, that you have become a slave to this thing and you don't even know it. But as I go back one more page, it says the tyrant, alcohol, or for me, drugs, it wielded a double-edged sword over us. First, we were smitten by an insane urge that condemned us to go on drinking, and then by an allergy of the body that ensured we would ultimately destroy ourselves in the process. And for me, that's powerlessness. that my mind is so warped and I am so lost in this deal that is the only thing I can think about. Even when I think I don't want to do it, and I will swear to you all day long that I'm not going to get loaded tonight, that I'm not going to do this. By the end of the night, I would be loaded again. And then once I start getting loaded, I cannot stop. And for me, that was the bitter end, is to the point to where I started going on these 6-7 day sprees, that no matter how much in me wanted to stop, it couldn't. So the way it was explained to me in powerlessness is that I had lost choice of whether or not I was going to use or drink or get loaded that night. And that finally made sense to me. Because just like I read, I could go back into my history and I could see that no matter how many times, no matter how many situations, no matter how many people wanted me to stop, even myself, that I couldn't stop, that I had lost the power of choice. So somewhere along my using and drinking career, I had crossed the line that there was no turning back to. When I realized that, I think that's when everything started changing. You know, I didn't want to die, but I didn't want to live, but I was willing this time. I was just talking to somebody out in the living room. I'd been coming out of these rooms for so long. Why did it change this time? Well, why did I get it this time? You know, and I started contemplating by why did I get it this time? Why did this time around I was able to get sober and stay sober? And it was because I understood these fundamental things about step one, that I'm completely powerless over this deal. That anytime I put a drink or a drug in my system, I'm going to put another one in, and I'm not going to stop. And I don't know when I'm going to stop. Someone has to stop me, or I have to run out of resources. And then when I don't have it, all I'm going to do is think about how I'm going to get it. Now, I might go a day, right? I might be okay for a day or two, but eventually my mind is going to condemn me to go back to the one thing. And then once the phenomenon of craving kicks in, I put it in my body, and allergy kicks in, and I'm caught in this cycle, this ever-winding door. Sometimes I like to picture it in my head. It's just a door that just keeps going in and out and in and out and in and out. And that was my life for a good 17 years. And I think, I tried so hard to manipulate this deal, right? Because all I wanted to do was use successfully. Because when I did use successfully, I was happy. I was good, man. Life was okay, man. But when I was sober, I was someone that you didn't want to know, you know. And so what has this program taught me? This program has taught me of how to live sober today. I was just talking to somebody. The first step really is about acceptance and honesty. And the type of honesty I'm talking about is not lip service honesty. This is an honesty on the inside. This is an honesty with yourself. You finally got to look at yourself. You got to look at your past history. You've got to draw back on your own experience to see if, am I powerless over this? Does this thing have complete control over me, right? Once you can become honest like that, and acceptance, I had to accept. On page 417, it tells me I had to accept this deal, my alcoholism, my drug addiction, before I could become sober. And until I accepted that, I would never be sober. I didn't know what sober was. Like I was just telling someone, I've went 39 years of my life not knowing what sober was. Every day I put a drink or a drug in my system. And when I didn't have it in my system, we were getting it somehow, Bill says step one is the only step that I've got to do 100% every day. And I believe that. I've got to, every day, I've got to look at this, that if I do that, if I put that in my system, I know what's going to happen. Like, I don't need you to tell me what's going to happen, because I've done it time and time and time and time again, that I know what's going to happen, right? And now I know. So any figure, and if anyone tells me about this deal and they leave out this bodily part, because this is a threefold disease, right? I have an obsession of the mind. I have a sick body, right? When I put it in my body, I don't stop. My mind condemns me to do it. And then I have what's called a spiritual malady. And for me, it was hard to accept to live a life sober on spiritual terms, or to go back to the one thing that I always knew, right? And I love the doctor's opinion, because it tells me that, I couldn't differentiate the truth from the false. And that's it for me, right? I couldn't accept. I didn't know any other life. I only knew a life of using drugs, of drinking, of using people, of breaking relationships, of getting fired from jobs and getting new jobs. I didn't know anything else. And essentially, I got loaded because I love to get loaded. That's it. because the feeling it gave me, it made life okay. I could live life on life's terms when I was loaded, right? But that's a life that's going to lead me to the grave. And time again in my past experience, I could see that every time I used, man, I wouldn't stop. And when I did stop, I couldn't stay stopped. So finally, I come to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm finally willing to do something, right? A little bit of something. I'm willing to do a little bit, I'm not willing to do everything yet, but I'm willing to do a little bit, right? So I buy into this deal that I'm powerless, and now I've got to look at the unmanageability of my life. So my whole life, I've always shoved everything off because drugs and alcohol made it okay for me, that I didn't have to deal with that stuff. But when I come in here, right, I've got to look at that unmanageability in my life. Everybody I owe, all the relationships I've destroyed, how I'm self-centered. Like, I've got to look at all of these different aspects for recovery to even be a possible thing for me. This is my experience in it. And once I could accept step one tells me the problem, that I'm powerless. That's the problem. The rest of the steps give me a solution. And I love that we read that if you're anything like us, that we have a solution to your problem. We do have a solution to your problem. And I am a walking miracle today because of Alcoholics Anonymous. And not only because of Alcoholics Anonymous, but because of the men and women in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm here tonight. I didn't want to be here tonight. And I'm here tonight because someone else was here for me. That's the whole reason I'm here tonight. I'm here because when I walked in this room, someone was here for me to explain to me how this whole deal works. Because like I said, when I came in here, I thought alcohol and drugs were the problem. Alcohol and drugs aren't the problem. I know today that I am in that specific class of people that can never put a drink or a drug in their system, because I know from past experience what happens today. So I thank you all for letting me be here today, and I thank you all for listening to me, and I thank Alcoholics Anonymous. That's all I got.